Just 7.92% of Australians aged over 16 are fully vaccinated in our country as of today. What's your assessment of Australia's vaccine rollout?
Well, look, it's hugely disappointing. I mean, we are way behind where we need to be. And really, it's inexcusable. You know, the other developed countries are so far ahead of us. The reason we're so far behind is because the government last year didn't buy enough vaccines. They didn't buy nearly enough Pfizer, and they didn't buy any Moderna. It's a comprehensive failure of administration, I'm afraid. There's no other. You can't put a gloss on it. It's not a philosophical issue or a policy issue where you've got three options and you choose one and it doesn't work, but the other two mightn't have worked either. This is just a failure to do the one single most important job the Commonwealth government had, which was to get the country vaccinated. So it's hugely disappointing.
Have you seen a bigger mistake made?
Look, I can't think of one. I can't think of a bigger black and white failure of public administration than this. You know, governments make lots of mistakes, of course, as we all do. But this was something that was very doable. Get plenty of vaccines, get people vaccinated as rapidly as possible. That's what we were told was going to happen. We were warned that if we were not vaccinated quickly, we would be sitting ducks, at the risk of new variants. I remember Raina McIntyre making that point right at the beginning of the year. So, these lockdowns are a consequence of the failure to get the vaccination done, and it's a massive fail. Yeah, there's no point putting there's no point going on and on about how bad it is, because it's done, right?
Yeah.
So the important thing is to go forward, but there is also no point kidding ourselves that this hasn't been a phenomenal failure in public administration. I don't see how else you can describe it.
We were told we were going to be at the front of the queue, right, for vaccination.
Yeah.
And
right.
Simon Birmingham has conceded that we are, I think he said Australia's at the back of the queue for Pfizer. How did we get to the back of the queue when we were at the front?
Well, we never were at the front, right? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, we should have bought as many vaccines from as many makers of vaccine as we could. If we had ended up with a big oversupply of vaccines, that would have been, as they say, a high-class problem. And we could then have given surplus supplies to PNG or Indonesia or the Pacific. You know, there's plenty of countries that we could have shared surplus vaccines with. But, how on earth we got to the point where we were short of the vaccines we needed, and let alone the confusion that you were talking about just a moment ago. It's mind-boggling. Vaccine hesitancy is a problem everywhere and at every time. It is as though governments are trying to do their utmost to maximise it at the moment with all of the disagreements and confusion. It's a mess.
Did the PM
that's the technical term.
A mess.
So it's a mess.
I called it a schmozzle on my podcast today.
Yeah,
so there you go, schmozzle. Did the
works.
PM make a mistake and muddy the message on the AstraZeneca vaccine after he came out of National Cabinet this week?
Yeah, look, I don't understand that. The answer is yes, obviously he did. But what I don't understand is that the whole purpose of a cabinet is solidarity. As cabinet, the principle of cabinet responsibility was supposedly founded by Lord Melbourne, a British Prime Minister back in the 1800s, when he, in frustration, threw up his hands and said, "Gentlemen, I don't care what we say as long as we all say the same thing." So the idea of coming out of the National Cabinet and announcing a new policy that had not been discussed, canvassed or agreed to in that cabinet is extraordinary. Because effectively that was, I don't know whether that was a thought bubble. I don't know whether Scott had workshopped that before. I have no idea. But the fact that you've got so many other premiers and chief medical officers disagreeing with it and very vocally obviously undermines confidence in the vaccine. I just want to say, by the way, that Lucy and I have had the AstraZeneca vaccine. Lucy's just as of today had her second shot, and my second shot is coming up in a couple of weeks. And I encourage everyone who can get vaccinated to do so.
Malcolm Turnbull, is it just a case, do you think, that the Prime Minister urged young people, after providing this indemnity for doctors, to go potentially and talk to GPs about getting AstraZeneca because we just don't have enough vaccines in this country? We can make AstraZeneca here and he just needs jabs in people's arms.
Yeah, well, we clearly don't have enough vaccines. We clearly don't have enough Pfizer. We don't have any Moderna. Yeah, for sure. That's obvious. We are short of vaccines, and that's because we didn't buy more last year. I mean,
is that a case? This intrigues me genuinely, this question, right? Is it a case of just bad luck, or is it mismanagement?
Well, of course it's mismanagement. I mean, the vaccines were available to be bought. You know, other countries. Why was everyone
bad
else
luck
so much
that
smarter than
AstraZeneca
us?
didn't turn out as well as we thought?
Yeah, but Patricia, seriously.
Just asking a provocative question.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question. But look, you know, there's no point making excuses for the inexcusable, right? It's a fundamental principle. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. It's obvious that with this pandemic, with the vaccines being developed very rapidly, with a level of uncertainty, that you would acquire a number of vaccines in large quantities. And that would mean that if they all turned out to be absolutely right for all age groups, you'd end up with a big surplus. So what? Yes, it's dollars, but then you share that with other countries. It is what I say, it's a high-class problem. But the idea of being left short, that was simply, I think it's inexcusable. I think, and it is baffling. And I mean, people around the world, who looked at Australia and said, gosh, you guys have done so well in 2020 with the, quarantines and borders, and, you've kept the community transmission down to very low levels, and they're very impressed by that, and now amazed. I mean, in many parts of the United States, they have upwards of 70% fully vaccinated. So, herd immunity, it's not everywhere in America, but in many parts of the country, herd immunity is there.
There have been 8 quarantine breaches in the last month in our hotels. When National Cabinet meets tomorrow, on Friday, the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews will argue for up to an 80% reduction in hotel quarantine capacity for the next 3 months until we get our vaccination rollout to a mass scale. Is that a reasonable way to deal with this?
Well, look, I guess, yes, I suppose so. I mean, whether it's 80% or 70% or 50%, that's a judgment call. But again, the fundamental problem here has been a failure in public administration. I mean, Jane Halton recommended last year that we needed to have more of the cabin-style quarantine facilities provided by the Commonwealth, who does have the constitutional responsibility for quarantine, I hasten to note, and like Howard Springs, so that you don't get that that transmission by aerosols, which is obviously how this disease is transmitted, and in particular the Delta strain. And those facilities should have been put in place, but they're only now just starting to I guess advance discussions. Look, but whether it is on the vaccination or the quarantine facilities, you have to scratch your head and say, how on earth could we have got into this situation? I mean, how on earth do you have people working in the front line with COVID, people with COVID not being vaccinated, and in the case of the driver apparently not wearing a mask? So there's a lot of questions here. Now, I just hasten to add, with any quarantine system, there's always going to be the risk of breaches, human error, etc. So I think if you're going to rank the failures in public policy here, and there have been a lot of successes too, but the biggest failure is not getting enough vaccines.
Your old Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, is back in the job 3 years after he stood down. What do you think of his return?
Well, it's look, I mean, that's the numbers game, right, in the National Party room.
Sure, but what are the implications of his return? Are the issues around him resolved?
Well, it depends if you mean the issues about, respect for women and allegations.
He's denied,
of
course, the sexual harassment allegations.
Yeah, well, time will tell whether those, whether that issue advances, depending on what other people say and do. I think from a policy point of view, Barnaby is clearly determined to do everything he can to prevent Australia making a commitment to get to net zero emissions by 2050. There has never been, in my recollection, an issue of global importance on which Australia is so at odds with its closest friends and allies than this one. We are really, really out of step. And Joyce is going to make it politically difficult, perhaps impossible, for the government to get in step. It is this sort of coal-hugging, climate-denying madness, because that's honestly what it is. It's essentially something that works in that, right-wing bubble, with Sky News and the Murdoch press, and it's obviously supported by the fossil fuel lobby, or large parts of it, and it really is. It's irresponsible from a global point of view. It's denying the reality of global warming and denying our responsibility to act. And it's also denying Australia potentially an enormous opportunity to become a clean energy superpower. We have all of the ingredients to do that. And this, I describe it as madness, which is probably not quite the right word, but it is so irrational. It is just populist claptrap that you're getting on, in this right-wing media bubble. I mean, these are the same people that are the same organisation, Murdoch's organisation, that are telling Americans that Donald Trump won the election. And it was that sort of craziness that fueled the attack on the Capitol on the 6th of January. So there is one of the biggest threats to our liberal democracies is actually the normalisation of extraordinary lying and falsehoods. And again, I said craziness. So
what's your advice over the television? Why not? To Scott Morrison about how to deal with him? I mean, you've had him as your Deputy Prime Minister. How would you handle him? What's your advice?
Well, I had a pretty good relationship with Barnaby, and I'm sure Scott will have a good relationship with him. You just have to look. The bottom line is you've got a cabinet government, and issues of policy have to be determined inside the cabinet. You'd be calling on Joyce not to freelance on policy outside of the cabinet. If there is a dispute where the Nationals are not prepared to agree to something, if they want to make that an issue, they're entitled to do so. It could, theoretically, it could bring down the government. They were threatening to do that at one point when I was Prime Minister over the National Energy Guarantee. That was one of the events that was, contributed to that, final week of my leadership when Dutton launched his coup. But, it was the same. A very familiar cast of characters are still involved, both inside and outside Parliament.
Malcolm Turnbull, we're out of time. Thanks for talking to me.
Thanks so much, Patricia.